So this is kind of like hopefully what you can remember. Just think through what everything is. We have like a little review questions soon. So what's what? Main thing to me is like the IAM role, right? This is our key card, and the key card, like we need to set two different policies on it, right? One is this, the one that we always see, like endow it with certain permissions, meaning like you hold the key card, you get to walk through these doors. Okay, so you can open up the Elastic Container Registry door, and that's like what's called an identity policy, right? So we not only need to, what's nice is there are pre-existing policies. For instance, if you go to AWS and then sign in, you can search for the policies like ECR. What is this one? ECR Container Registry. I'll have to get the exact. Hold on, I'll show you. Yeah, EC2 Container Registry read only. You can like search for it, and it will just show up. So if you like see one referenced, you can just plug that into AWS. So this policy like pre-exists, right? AWS created it for us. So we don't really need to create it in Terraform. All we need to do is actually like say we want to attach the not this thing already exists. We need to reference it and attach the policy to the role. Once we attach the policy to the role, then our key card opens the doors that allow us to access ECR, right? So that's one kind of policy, is the identity policy. The other one is, right, this trust policy, also called like the assume role policy, and that is like who is allowed to hold this key card, okay? So for us, it's the EC2 machines, all right? And that's basically it, Oh, and then the last thing is this says it's allowed to hold it, right? Like EC2 resources are allowed to hold the key card, but to actually give the key card or like tag, it's more like tag this EC2 machine with this role, we have to first wrap this role in a profile. It just exists, just something we have to do, and then attach the profile to the EC2 machine. Okay? So it's to go from here to here, right? There's multiple steps. We need the role, we need the profile that wraps it, we need to attach the profile to the EC2, we need to create two policies or attach two policies, one of which is this trust policy that says EC2s are allowed to hold the role or be associated with it. The other one is to say this role allows you to access the ECR. Questions about that? And then we can see this in Terraform. So in Terraform, right, like that's basically what you kind of do. You can create this repository. You probably already have it, so you don't need to. Then we create our instance. Here my instance is attached to the profile, okay? And we just spit out the name. All right, so you have the instance profile and you associate it with that instance profile's name. And we know this instance profile is going to have to wrap our role, right? So here's our role, here's our instance profile that wraps the role. So that's this thing, right? And we created this guy. So the EC2, the role, and the instance profile. What's next? We need the trust policy saying EC2s can assume this role, and we also need this, what this role allows you to do, access the ECR. So that's this part. Here we are saying you hold this key card, you get to, access ECR. This policy, like I said, we're not creating it here. We're just referencing an existing policy. And we're doing that with the ARN, right? The ARN is the Amazon resource number, basically like the Amazon ID. Okay? So it's like everything in Amazon, like your EC2, your ECR, everything gets its own ARN. This is a resource. under like the IAM folder, under the policy folder, that then has this identity. Okay, and like we said, we can look that up. So we are attaching this existing role to the policy. And then the other thing we needed to do, it's happening at the same spot, is basically when we're defining the role, we are also defining this assume role policy. Okay, so let's just walk through this policy. Any questions? I'm about to walk through this policy, and then we can go a little bit more into defining custom policies instead of using a pre-existing one. Okay. So here's our policy. A policy contains many statements, all right? And so the statement that we have defined, right? So you can see that this is a list of dictionaries. We have defined a single statement, and the statement has one action. A statement can have many actions. So for instance, you could be like, allow many things at once. But in this case, we'll just allow one thing, which is we'll allow the assume a secure token service that says, that basically gives the EC2 that we're attaching this role to, it will give it a secure token that allows it to hold the key card, right? The same, like that's how it kind of gives it permissions, is by giving it a secure token. So secure token service for assume role, we are allowing it to do that, right? And we're giving this to any of the services. Sorry, any EC2 service. So the principal is the guy who's holding the card, right? Who's like making use of the permission. And then the SID is the statement ID. So you can give this statement, this is optional. So you can give it an ID like, EC2. It's just like a way to reference it, but you don't have to do that. Yeah, Conwell?
Yeah, Jeff. So I have a confusion regarding this assume rule. So this action and assume rule, I'm confused why we need to specify this when we at the outermost level, the slide 25 assume rule policy, which should sort of indicate that this is to do with the assuming of the rule. Then we have to again explicitly say the action assume rule is what is confusing to me. And on top of that, this effect is equal to allow is confusing as well. Like, why this effect needs to be there? Like, I can understand there might be some other effect like deny or something.
Mm-hmm.
But my concern here, question here is, if we want to deny this assume rule to any other service or stuff like that, we will just not include that in the statement list. So I'm trying to understand why the effect, and first foremost the action, which is more confusing to me, and then effect. Maybe I can understand why effect is there, but action is definitely something confusing to me. But when it's inside the assume role policy.
Right. Yeah, so it's like this assume role policy, I think part of your point is like this thing should basically fill itself out by itself. You know what I mean? Like all right, it's an assume role policy. What do we need for it? Well, we need to give it this secure token service that allows it to actually assume the role. It obviously isn't allow because like that's the whole point of this thing, to allow it to assume the role. Maybe this is optional, but I think basically like the way I think of it is this is just a slot for you to specify a policy. For you to just specify a policy. And each policy, you have to define like the statements. And this, it's like, here, let's define a policy that has this statement associated with it. And what is the statement? The statement is like allow to assume the role, allow any service to do it. And like I said, you don't need this. So Terraform kind of like gives us this slot, like this name, assume role policy. But I think in AWS, it's really just a policy. It's called we're actually going to get to it later. It's called like a resource policy. And basically, so I think it will make a little more sense when we talk about resource policies. But basically, this is like, you can think of this, you can think of the resource policy. It's kind of like a bouncer. Who kind of says like who's on the list that gets to like use this thing. So we have this key card, and it's like who's on the list that gets to use the key card. Right now, we'll let this, any EC2 machine, they're at least on the list. Like we will allow them to assume the role to hold this key card. They walk in the door, say they want to hold on to this thing. Basically, we try to attach this policy to it, then the bouncer will check, and it will allow it to hold on to it, right? And that's the only thing that can do it. Now, so we'll again like then there you can why allow like or why would we ever need deny? I think is your next question. Well, let's say I think that will probably make more sense when we get to resource policies, but it's the same kind. You could imagine a case where we have like the bouncer, it says deny, but we have an identity policy that says allow, right? The bouncer would win in that case. That probably feels a little confusing right now. That will make more sense when we get to resource policies. But yeah, I think the real way to think of it is like there's not really this assume role policy is kind of like a Terraform, like it's like it's not really a thing, kind of like it's not a first order kind of like object in AWS. It's just a kind of policy, and there are really like these. And whenever we define a policy, you have to what really its power comes from is the statement, and Terraform's just not smart enough, I guess, to fill this stuff out for you, Yeah. Okay, so you can see that, like, you're going to see something similar, right, with this. This here, notice we're not defining a policy here, right? This is our identity policy, right? This allows it to, says, if you hold the key card, you can access the ECR. But notice we are not defining the policy here. We are just attaching it, right? AWS IAM role policy attachment. We're attaching, this is like a join table. We're attaching the role, our key card, to this policy. Where's the policy defined? The policy is defined back in AWS here. What does this policy consist of? What is the key thing about it? The statements, right? So this again has one statement. The effect is allow, right? And then this is everything that you can do. You can get the authorization token. That's the key one. Check the layer availability, download URL, policy. Yeah, you probably need that too. I don't remember. This one, these guys you don't need. Like this is more general about ECR in general. Like tell me all the repositories, list all the images. But if you just want to download one image and you know what it is, you don't need to be able to call like list all the images. This resource, there's two different things. There's a resource and there's a principal. Okay, principal is who's able to perform the action, like who's able to make the request. This, we're saying EC2 machines get to ask to assume the role. That's the principal. Who's acting, right? Who's like a king, like who's making the request. All right. The resource is like who are you making the request to? Give me this cup, right? The resource is the cup. The resource is we're saying you can access any one of the ECR machines, any of the ECR repositories. You're able to access. That's what the star is indicating. You could also imagine just plugging in like a list of ARNs, of like only these repositories, only these resources. That would be another option. Okay, so this statement, this is an identity statement, and we're saying if we're going to attach it to our keycard, to a role, and it's going, when we attach it, you get this stuff for free, right? You get to do these things. You get to perform these actions. This is an allow, right? You're allowed to perform these actions on any resource in ECR. Okay? That's what it's saying. Now you can create your own policy, right? And that's kind of and so far we're only we're always creating what's called like an identity policy. The only kind of this I think of this, and it probably is technically a resource policy. This assume role policy is kind of like our bouncer thing, but everything else is an identity policy saying like, if you hold this key card, what can you do? And so now instead of referencing an existing one, the one from AWS, we can create our own one. Okay? So this is our own like new resource policy. You can use it with the AWS IAM policy, right? Like that's the Terraform resource. And then this is the name I'm giving it in Terraform. ECR custom read only. Okay, this is the name it will show up at in AWS. This is the description. And then here's the same thing. So you can kind of see like every policy follows the same format. So here's the JSON. Here's the API version. Here's the statement that has a list of list of statements, right? These are a list of statements. Here is one statement. And it's kind of the same thing. I'm allowing to get the authorization token, get the batch image, check the layer. So this is everything for downloading an image. This is any image you want to download, right? The resource star. I'm allowing you to download it. All right. So you create this policy. If you want to use a custom policy, you'll create the policy, right? You'll fill out this information, or you'll ask ChatGPT, what do I need? And it will spit you out this, but you need to be able to understand this, right? Like, because it's going to break, and you're going to have to debug it. So, okay, so then we get this stuff, and now what do we need to do? We created the policy, but we need to attach it to our role. So you could, if you want to attach multiple things, you could, make a separate attachment. But what we'll do, we'll just replace using the pre-built one with using this one. Okay, so how will we do that? Well, think about what we need here. It's the ARN, right? We're attaching with the policy ARN. So how do we get this thing's ARN? I think you just do AWS IAM policy dot ECR custom read only. Give me this guy dot ARN, and that will spit out the ARN and associate it here. And then you can do, oops, I already logged in. Terraform apply. Okay. So it's just, there's not a big, I don't think you learned a ton new. It's mainly review. The only thing we're doing a little different is instead of me referencing an existing policy, we'll just create a new policy that's a little bit more restrictive. And so you can see we define it here, we attach it to the role, and then each policy, like this is important, like understanding how a policy works, that you get a set of actions, and these are the actions we're allowing for on any resource. All right. Cool. Oh, no. Force replacement. Yeah, that's fine. So it says, this already exists. Duplicate names are not allowed. It could be... Did I already... Let's see.
Good job.
Yeah.
I've run into this before. Yeah, exactly. It's the name.
For this, you can...
Yep.
Yeah, you can just omit the name. Like, you could just delete it in AWS. And I think it will still work.
I was gonna ask you about that because I was wondering, like, after you create a policy and attach it, and for some reason you need to destroy everything and start over, then the policy exists in AWS, and when you try to create it, it won't let you. So you're faced with either renaming stuff or some other solution. Like,
yeah, you could, I mean, I think you should be able to destroy it and then apply it, right?
I wasn't. Well, maybe I was running the init again or something in a different project, or. but I was hitting the same error.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I will just delete the name just to, if it's, if I'm going through a lab and it's annoying. Otherwise, you can update it, or just, be careful about Terraform destroy, and that should destroy these policies, and then you can recreate them. All right, so let's just make sure this worked. We'll go to the EC2. Good, I only have one instance running. I think, hopefully this is the one that just got created. Launch time. That feels like it was earlier, doesn't it? Oh, maybe it's the same instance. I booted up before class. It just attached a different policy. That's interesting. So let's see. Here's the IAM role. So it's the same role as before. Do we see the policies here? Here's the policy name. So this is probably our custom policy, right? So it gave it a name. And then we'll click on the policy. And then here you can see, like here it's kind of like, I like seeing the JSON, Like I don't know how to understand this so well. I like seeing the JSON. This is what we wrote, right? You all following? Cool. So this is what we wrote. So here you can see our policy. Here's our Terraform policy that we have attached. And like I said, we went from the EC2 machine, clicked on the IAM role to see it. Then what is this IAM role? What can it do? We clicked on the IAM role. We saw that it has this policy. Then we went to look at it. Oh, click on the policy. And then in the policy, we went to look at it in JSON. And now you can see, because just seeing the policy is nothing really. What you really are looking for is the actions. Like what actions can you now perform through this policy that's associated with our role? Okay. The next thing you can do now, we can log in to the EC2 machine. And one thing that's useful, actually am I in it? Yeah, I'm in my EC2. One thing that's useful, I'll just press up because I forget, but it's AWS STS get caller identity. Okay, this is used. So what does this mean? AWS is our AWS command line. STS is the secure token service. Get caller identity is like, what is the role that's asking, that's accessing the secure token service. In other words, we're logged into this EC2 machine. This is another way of finding out what is the role that's associated with this EC2 machine. And it is properly, right, our EC2 ECR role that we associated with it. EC2 ECR role, okay? So that looks good. You know what I mean? Like that's a very useful thing to be like, what am I, I created this EC2 machine. Did I attach the role properly? Right? We did. From there, you can find the role, find the policies that are attached to the role. Okay? And now we should be able to, I'd have to do it, but like sudo yum install Docker, all that stuff, and we could we should be able to access our ECR repository. I don't think we need to do it. Everything's looking good. All right, so what did we cover? All right, we basically covered this diagram again. The role, the profile wraps it. The trust policy says, hey, EC2s are allowed to hold this key card, right? And then we attach a policy to the role saying you hold this key card, you get to access ECR, right? And we created our own custom policy in this case, as opposed to using the pre-built one. Questions about any of that? All right, I think maybe the first thing, let's spend I'll put you into breakout rooms in a second. I say spend the first 15 minutes going through these questions. You can write them down yourself and then share them with a partner. So, yeah, Kyle?
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's any way to conditionally import roles depending on what you're spinning up with Terraform. So far, it seems like it's a very like YAML-like sort of
Yes.
template, but I wasn't sure how. I know it's like configuration as code, but wasn't sure how fancy you could get with it.
Like,
I'm not sure what my use case is.
Yeah, that would be my
Yeah,
question. It's
but-
like, what is the use case? Because
Mhm.
like by design, these things don't have too much logic, right? Like it's like this is you can kind of it's I forget the word. Maybe someone you're not saying how to do something. I forget. There's a coding word for this where you're not specifying how to do something. You're just saying this is the state I want to exist. All right. So you're not saying create this and then you're saying no. This is what I want to exist. I want an AWS provider. I want this guy. You know what I mean? Like I want this role created. I want it attached. Right. And I think it's called like declarative programming versus imperative programming. I think this is declarative programming where you're just saying, I declare it and it is so. Okay? If it was imperative programming, I'll give you an example of what you'd have to do differently. You'd have to say like, first create the policy, like first create this policy and then attach it, right? Obviously we can't attach it before it exists. But this is declarative programming. So the idea is we just declare and Terraform figures out that, hey, I better get this guy done before I do this thing, right? So there's very little actual like logic here, right? We're not finding any use case for like if else, first do this, then do that. We just specify our state. This is the state of our infrastructure that we want. You go do it. So that's why I think probably not, it's not, Terraform by design is like not supposed to be used that way. The only exception I can think of so far that we've done is when we've done the depends on, right? Remember we said like, don't boot this thing up, until our database comes online, right? That was really our only non-declarative part. Okay, so here are the questions that you can kind of think about. What are the two policies we need? What do each of these policies do? Each policy consists of many statements. What information is specified in each statement? Just write out as much as you can think of. I think there's only 4 things. What is the difference between a policy and a role? What is the difference between a policy and a resource? How do security groups compare to policies? This requires you to think a little bit. How are security groups different from policies? Take a look at the following AWS role and assume role policy inside of it, blah, blah. Okay, tell me what each of these should be. Don't Google it. The idea is for you to try, struggle, feel the pain. Okay, so I will deploy this. Just do your best, better now than on an interview. And honestly, if you can answer and explain this stuff well, people will be very impressed that you understand this. Okay, so do your best. Spend some time answering these questions, really try, and then